Good morning, everybody. I hope you all had a great holiday Thanksgiving break. And I hope you're having a good week so far. As usual, I always like to say, just killing some time, giving it a moment for everybody to join into the webinar today. We have a really exciting topic and particularly presenter today to talk to us about nutrition, Dr. Gardner. Next week, I want to mention we are in person for Grand Rounds, both, of course, in Zoom as well. We have our Hewlett Award winner, our 2021 Hewlett Award winner, Dr. Paul Yock, who will be presenting Stanford and the evolving landscape of health technology innovation. So please join us in person if you can. It was really great last month for the awards to see a lot of you in person as well as online. So please join if you can in person. If you can't, please join online as well. And with that being said, really excited today for our main presenter. I want to thank many of our faculty who helped put these grand rounds together, particularly Dr. Katsumoto, who will be introducing Dr. Gardner today. So Dr. Katsumoto, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks so much for helping host today's grand rounds.
Great. Thank you so much, Errol and Christopher, for coming. So Christopher Gardner holds a PhD in nutrition science. He's the Rehnborg Farquhar Professor of Medicine at Stanford. His home within Department of Medicine is the Stanford Prevention Research Center. For about 30 years, his research has examined what to eat and what to avoid for optimal health. This includes more than 20 nutrition interventional trials conducted with over 2,000 participants. The study topics of interest have included garlic, soy, antioxidants, popular diets, plant-based alternative meats, fiber, and fermented foods. He's the current chair of the American Heart Association Nutrition Committee. He's also worked with the American Diabetes Association, and he was recently selected to serve on the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee to update the dietary guidelines for Americans in 2025. Two shifts in his current research include diet in the microbiome and working in institutional food settings, such as universities, work sites, hospitals, K through 12, as well as food banks. Importantly, Christopher is one of the most highly respected scientists in the nutrition world. He is well known for his rigor in conducting some of the highest quality dietary interventional trials. His Diet Fits publication in JAMA 2018 had the highest altmetric score for JAMA that year and was selected by the American Heart Association as one of the most impactful papers of 2018. His recent work on the microbiome in collaboration with Justin Sonnenberg has been published in high-profile journals like Cell, and he has made headlines in the New York Times. Please join me in warmly welcoming our very own Christopher Gardner for this week's Medicine Grand Rounds. Christopher.
All right. Thank you very much for the generous introduction. I have to say I'm pretty excited that I get to kick off on the day that the U.S. team just made the World Cup next round. So yay for soccer. And as far as I know, the Senate just in a bipartisan way passed same-sex marriage bill or moved that along. So maybe building on some successes there. I wonder if any of you are wondering why I got asked to talk between Thanksgiving and Christmas. I want to assure you, there wasn't anything insidious involved there. I mean, we let you go for Thanksgiving, and I'm not the diet police. So hopefully I'm going to inspire you to eat an unapologetically delicious diet that's good for you and good for the planet. But that maybe there's something insidious about this timing. Actually, I think I'm filling the slot of someone who canceled, so it's not really that insidious. So a couple of disclosures here. I don't make any money for my advisory board position with Zoe, but I did get some funding dollars from Beyond Meat, so you might want to consider me an industry shill, which I'll cover a little later. Just in case, I hate running through thanks at the end real fast because I ran out of time, so I put it at the beginning. I have a great lab group that I work with. I work a lot with the Sonnenbergs, who have another great lab group. I've fantastic funding from the NIH and a bunch of generous donors, and there isn't enough time to thank everybody. And these are actually some old pictures. We haven't had any new updated pandemic pictures. A lot of folks on our team actually don't work local anymore. They're remote in different states, but couldn't have presented what I'm about to present without the help of tons and tons of people. So my background here on this precision nutrition idea is building off the NIH. They just funded a $170 million project across multiple clinical centers, data generation centers, all of us that they're using for this. They've got all kinds of AI and stuff going on. This is an incredible effort where they're going to get 10,000 people to do one thing, 2,500 people to do another thing. They're going to incarcerate 500 people and feed them through the doors and bars and windows and make sure they know what they're eating. And in about 5 years, that'll be done. And 2 years later, there'll be some publications. So we won't really know anything about that for quite a while. But there's a huge NIH initiative going on there. I'm curious, for those of you who tuned in, what you might think precision nutrition means for you. Is this just basically how many carbs, proteins, and fats you should eat and how you should balance those out? Is it keto versus low-fat vegan? Are you looking for a food pattern? Do you think if we figured out nutrition precision, that's what it would be? Or how about food groups? I mean, we already know that there's people with gluten intolerance. We know that people have lactose intolerance. Are we looking to see if somebody really should have beans and somebody shouldn't? If somebody should have certain vegetables and somebody shouldn't? I can tell you where it's not going to go. It's not going to go to the level of saying, Tomiko, you should be eating raspberries, and Christopher, you should be eating blueberries, because that's just ridiculous. And that would drive me nuts, because I'm pretty much a raspberry slut. I will do just about anything for raspberries. So even if you told me I was genetically predisposed to enjoy blueberries more than raspberries, I don't think I'd even do it. There's a bunch of companies out there trying to rise to the challenge for this. It'd be fun to see a show of hands, but I can't see any hands. How many of you have signed up for any of these personalized apps? You can't do Habit or Aravel anymore because they're already out of business. Although Eran Segal's program, Day 2 from the Weizmann Institute, still going strong. This Zoe group from the UK, which is international, that I'm part of, is pretty fun. I'll allude to that later. They're actually still going strong. Almost every talk I give lately, someone in the audience is actually signed up for the Zoe app. Who's sent in their poop? Come on, admit it. Did you pay $90 and did you send it in? And what did they tell you? And did you change your diet and change your poop? Did you send it again to see if your poop got better? There's a lot of options out there, and this field is moving fast. There's a huge interest in precision nutrition, and quite often the commercial side of this is getting ahead of the science. So here's Ubiome, which got disrupted with some charges of fraud. So, as I go through this, I'll be curious to hear at the end with questions, maybe what kind of thoughts you have about precision nutrition personally. I got into this years ago when we did a weight loss study called the A to Z study, which was Atkins versus Zone versus Ornish versus a traditional health professionals diet. And had 309 women enrolled who were overweight or with obesity, and they didn't have any big average differences in weight loss, but a huge range of weight loss within each of them, which kind of led me to believe, wow, maybe there is something that predisposes folks to lose more weight on one diet versus another. So in regard to precision nutrition, we got a bigger study funded for 600 plus adults. We only chose 2 diets, a low fat and a low carb diet. I don't have time to give you all the details here, but I want to tell you how we set this up. So we made both of them very healthy. We hired a bunch of fabulous dietitians from our team and said, okay, you are going to counsel these free living adults, and you have 12 months to work with them. And we want you to give them the best low fat and the best low carb you can, and see if maybe there's 2 predisposing factors. The original hypothesis was never to see if one diet was better than another, but to see if there was effect modification. Could there be a genotype predisposition, or maybe a metabolic predisposition along the lines of insulin resistance, or what we actually were measuring was baseline insulin secretion? Could there be a precision nutrition aspect there? So 12 months later, every bar here is a man and a woman in the study. Overall, they lost 6,500 pounds. But look at the range of weight loss among them. This is actually exactly what we wanted to see. Don't these look superimposable? There's actually no average difference between the two. But we had people losing 25 kilos on both diets and gaining 10 kilos in both diets. This is a 75-pound range of response to the same dietary instruction. So we were pretty excited. We actually had some preliminary evidence that would suggest there was a genotype pattern predisposition and there was a metabolic predisposition. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to have to cut to the chase. Neither of them worked. And this is after, oh God, this is so many years of my life. This is 5 grant rejections and finally got it funded, and 5 years to fund it and a year or 2 to publish it. This is a decade of my life. And I got interviewed by the New York Times, said, wow, your big study's over. And what happened? And I explained what happened. I said, neither of our predisposing factors worked out. I said, oh, so you found nothing. I said, no, not after 10 years. It's not that we found nothing. And I spent a lot of time actually describing how our work might not have replicated some others before us, partly because we worked really hard to make it a healthy low carb and a healthy low fat. So in fact, both diets were restricting added sugars and refined grains, even though those are low fat items. The low fat group was not encouraged to eat those. They were told to avoid them. We never prescribed a caloric restriction, which was an interesting twist to this. So we just said, eat low fat, low carb, eat as low as you can. Don't give up on quality. Make sure you go to the farmer's market and do other great things. Don't give up on quality. And interestingly, getting some background from somebody who's not muted there, maybe. Given this description, Anna O'Connor wrote this up in a full-page New York Times article. And I got to tell you, the title killed me. The key to weight loss is quality, not quantity, a new study finds. That isn't even close to the hypothesis that we had. And in fact, if you read the whole article, which isn't covered here, he did a fairly nice job of covering what we found, but he flipped it. And instead of being focused on predisposing factors, noted that we had no caloric prescription. When people focused on a quality low fat and a quality low carb, they lost weight on both diets on average. And that's how they flipped it. So I guess if the media is going to misinterpret your results, this is probably a pretty safe bet for being misinterpreted. But it was interesting how this was presented. And it led me thinking, okay, so, what other precision nutrition type things can we do? And one of my favorite new partners is the Sonnenberg Lab, this internationally famous Erica and Justin couple working on the microbiome together. And one of the studies that we published recently had to do with alternative plant-based meats. I bet you a bunch of you have tried those. Hope you appreciate our acronym here, the SWAP Meat Trial. So in this particular trial, we got 40 adults to try one and then the other, each for 8 weeks. So they switched and they had 2 servings a day of either Beyond Meat, or actually we went to Good Eggs in San Francisco and we got regenerative, farm, organic, all the right things that you wanted to say, sort of good quality red meat. So we're trying to go for equipoise here. We're not trying to do Beyond Meat versus crappy red meat. We tried to do Beyond Meat versus good quality meat. Main outcome of the study as written up was TMAO. Precursors for this are generally in red meat, choline and carnitine. Kind of expected this to be better in the plant-based group, and it was. It was lower in plant than animals, statistically significant. Had a very small weight loss that was statistically significant because it was consistent. It was about a pound or 2 in each participant. Not clinically meaningful, but significant and surprising because they seem to be eating the same number of calories. I can't explain that. I could easily explain the LDL benefit. There was less saturated fat, more fiber, plus they lost a little weight. But I want to focus on this TMAO for a minute. So this ended up being a crossover trial. And try to save some money on sample size here, and everybody's their own control. I'm going to present individual results for this TMAO on both phases. So about 20 people did plant first and animal second, 20 did animal first and plant second. So starting here, you can see as folks were on the animal phase, their TMAO went up. And not up in everybody. Look how many people it actually didn't move for. So that's interesting also. But this rise is driven by several individuals. And then they switched to plant-based. There's actually no washout in this study. If you want it, we can talk about washouts later. It immediately dropped and stayed down on the plant. Okay, so that was pretty anticipated. Now, when you run a crossover trial, you're certainly hoping there aren't any carryover effects or interactions. And so here's folks that did plant first, and it goes down a little bit on plant. Then they switch to animal, and it, damn, what happened? Okay, now I'm tongue-tied trying to write this thing up. the beauty of the crossover is everybody their own control, but what if the two orders don't match? What if there's an interaction? So the Sonnenbergs right now are looking at the stool samples that we have from everybody, because it looks like, okay, now this is completely the wrong way to interpret this, but for TMAO anyway, all you got to do is turn vegan for a while, and then you can eat meat. And that sounds a little odd. Why would you turn vegan so you could eat meat? But some of the data that are out there suggests that while on a vegan diet, you change the microbiome, which is important in the conversion of choline and carnitine to TMA, which then gets converted by the liver to TMAO. And so what we might be seeing here is something along the lines of precision nutrition. We actually changed the microbiome, which changed the metabolic response to what they were eating. So that's something that we're following up on. And in another study that we've done with the Sonnenbergs, it got published in Cell last year. This is our Fifo Study. Hope you like that acronym. We got a very different response for fiber and fermented food. I'll try to, in this graphical abstract, I'll show you the main interesting finding here. I'll skip to the bottom at first. The fermented food folks increased their microbial diversity and saw 20 different inflammatory markers go down using the Olink platform that we worked on with Mark Davis and Holden Maker at the Human Immune Monitoring Center. So this is really fun to see. The Sonnenbergs actually didn't expect this from their mouse work, which they've been doing for decades. They didn't anticipate this. They thought fiber was going to do much better in the fiber group. Actually, it was no decrease overall in inflammatory markers. But an interesting finding they had was if they looked at baseline microbial diversity and split up the folks in this study, not a large study, there's only 18 people in either study, so big caveat here. There's a group with very low baseline microbial diversity that actually had a rise in inflammation, as if to suggest that if your microbes aren't set up to digest all that fiber, and you have a fire hose of fiber hitting you, it actually might be deleterious. And those who had a greater baseline microbial diversity actually handled it well, but this kind of canceled out what was going on. So what we were feeding them is food. So the fiber-rich folks were getting basically prebiotics, these fibers that feed and fuel the microbiome that's living in our colon, as opposed to the other folks who were asked to have at it and eat as many servings per day of fermented foods pictured here, which technically isn't probiotics. Those are the pills and the supplements that you buy. But basically what we're talking about here is live bacteria that you're eating, and pretty proud of our nutrition team. I'm going to show you what we got folks to eat. So fiber group was eating about 20 grams a day at baseline. Fermented food was almost eating no fermented food at baseline. We have a 4-week ramp up period where they're trying to eat more. And look, fiber group gets up to 40 grams a day, doubling their fiber. The fermented food group is getting from 0-ish to 5. Then they had to maintain it for 6 weeks. Woohoo! Hats off to the dietitians and the nutrition educators here. They maintained that high fiber for all those weeks. And then look over here at fermented food. They're above 5. They're at 6 servings a day. Okay, quick caveat. I know it might sound like a lot, but a half a cup of sauerkraut and a half a cup of kimchi is a serving. And one of those bottles of kombucha that you might buy in the store is typically 2 servings. And so if you actually put 5 or 6 servings together, it's usually only about 300 calories in the day. So they weren't just eating fermented food all day, but they did increase it by quite a bit. And then super proud of this. At the end, we had a choice. Said, okay, the study's over. What are you eating now? And our participants in the fiber group who had been eating 20 studies all over, they liked some of those plants. They were still maintaining 30 grams a day. And look at the folks here that are eating the fermented food. They actually liked some of those fermented food and kept eating them when the study was over. So that was pretty rewarding. But at the end of the day, I really love the way the Sonnenbergs helped to interpret these findings. So for fiber, no change in diversity, no change in inflammation. For fermented, big increase in diversity. And caveat or a note here, the diversity wasn't just the microbes they were eating in the fermented food. When they did an overall scenario of where the microbes were coming from, about 90% of them were not from what they were eating. They were from other sources, as if maybe they were actually present in the gut, and by changing the environment or the milieu there, it opened up the possibility for others to bloom. So this is an ongoing, fascinating area of investigation. Big increase in diversity, but not just what they were eating. And again, 20 different inflammatory markers dropped. So the way they interpreted this with the help of our group was that fiber was probably a personalized thing. Individual differences. You'd have to see what your baseline microbiome was. And this is one of those examples where personalized nutrition, precision nutrition might come into play. The Sonnenberg's goal is that 10 years out from now, we're going to be able to diagnose someone's microbiome, look for deficiencies in some of the healthier bacteria, and provide those, and then feed people the fiber that fuel those specific microbes. So this would be precision nutrition, whereas this one is just general. People would do better to eat more fermented foods. Most people don't eat a lot of fermented foods, and we saw benefits across the board. So general benefit, precision nutrition benefit, that was pretty fun. And we just recently published a ketogenic versus Mediterranean diet study. This is set up, I'm very frustrated with the ketogenic diet. It just goes against everything that we think is sound. Okay, maybe not everything. So I'll tell you 3 things that are probably in common between keto and Mediterranean. So lots of starchy vegetables. They would both say non-starchy vegetables. They'd both say include those. They'd both say avoid added sugars and refined grains. So in our intervention, we had that be similar between the 2 arms. And then when we went to beans, fruits, and whole intact grains, keto is supposed to avoid all of those. Oh, that's crushing for a nutrition scientist like myself. Every health organization I know recommends eating whole beans and whole fruits and whole grains. So Mediterranean celebrates these. Keto, you're supposed to avoid them. Okay, I'm totally on board with the refined grain and the added sugar, but it just doesn't make sense to get rid of these healthy carbs. I'm going to share some data that I cite often from Shan et al. This is N. Haynes data, the Nutrition, Health, and Nutrition Examination Survey. This is from 1999 to 2016. Carbohydrate, protein, and fat subtypes. So quickly look at sort of the proportion of calories that really haven't changed much in 2 decades. About 10% of calories come from high quality carbs, 10 from animal, 6 from plant, 10 from monosaturated and poly. Doesn't really change much. So what is the elephant in the room here? Oh my God, it's the low quality carbs. Here's all those added sugars and refined grains. All the health professionals I know are totally on board for getting rid of these. That would make it a low carb diet. Probably if you got rid of as many as you could or all of these, what would you replace it with? We could discuss this later if you want. People don't change their protein very much. I'd love to get into that, but not now. So you could replace these all with high carbs, or you could replace these all with unsaturated fats. Realistically, you should probably do it with both. Get rid of all these low quality carbs and have more high quality carbs, which would include beans and fruits and whole intact grains, and more mono and polyunsaturated fats. That would probably be the way to do that. So our central question here was, if you focus on reducing and eliminating the added sugars and refined grains, are there really additional benefits to getting rid of beans, fruits, and whole grains? Our study design was a crossover again, 20 adults with type 2 diabetes and 20 with prediabetes, randomized to these orders. We delivered food for the first 4 weeks of 12-week phases, and then they provided their own food, cooked it, bought it, ate it on their own. Okay, so I hope that the design is simplistic and clear. We even waited 12 weeks after they finished the study to see what they're eating. I'm always interested in what the long-term effects of trying to achieve dietary change are. So this is a fabulous graphic from Matt Landry. Give him huge credit for writing up this. So we created a specialized adherence scores for both of our diets. Instead of just keto, we actually used a well-formulated ketogenic diet approach. This is Jeff Volek and Steve Finney. We used a Med Plus score. This is the Mediterranean diet score. Plus, we added this emphasis on eliminating added sugars and refined grains. And I just think this graphic is so important to see. Humans aren't mice. Okay, so here's people not eating a very keto-like diet at baseline, not eating a very Mediterranean diet at baseline. But look what happens. Okay, so in the food delivery phase and the self-provided phase, for internal validity, we got them both to about the same level, about 7.5 and about 5.5 on this score, up from baseline. This is lots and lots of diet assessment. Happy to answer questions about that later if you want. So what's going to happen when we get this kind of similar adherence to the two diets? Wait. Before I show you the results, let's talk about this for a minute. What the hell is going on here? I bought them the damn food and I delivered it to them. And this is what, okay, so how frustrating is this, or how heartening? They actually were honest. They said, yes, you delivered the food, but I didn't eat it. So, I mean, is that demoralizing, or is that encouraging that they're at least honest about it? I don't know. Again, we could discuss later. This is pretty fascinating. When they're on self-provided and they're providing their own food, look at the difference in range here. I mean, this is pretty fascinating. A bunch of people really kicked butt on keto. Even look, nobody's scoring that high on Mediterranean. This is pretty simple. Don't eat any carbs. And that really resonated for a bunch of people. But look at this whole pool of people who couldn't even come close to that. So is there some kind of personalized precision nutrition going on here? For results, here's what we get. They both benefited for lowering HbA1c. That was the primary outcome. It was not statistically significant. And really across the board, let me skip to the end. They both lost a bunch of weight on either diet. Glucose got better. Insulin got better. HDLs got higher. Triglycerides got lower. Liver enzymes down. The only two statistically significant findings were that the keto raised LDL while Mediterranean lowered it, so win for Mediterranean. They both lowered triglycerides, but keto lowered it even more. So you could almost call this a wash clinically, right? There's really only two clinically statistically significant findings here. One favors Mediterranean and one favors keto. So maybe that's a wash. I don't have time to go into everything, but I can tell you that we had some continuous glucose monitoring data. If you looked overall, keto did a little better for glucose control and did lower triglycerides, but at the cost of a rise in LDL. They decreased their fiber, and we're actually looking at the microbiome right now because we think this decrease in fiber may have had an adverse effect on the microbiome. And quite a few nutrients were lower in keto because it's such a restrictive diet than Mediterranean, and it was less sustainable. If I go back to that graph that Matt Landry drew up, as you look 12 weeks after the diet was over, very few people were able to sustain anything close to a keto diet. It was more Mediterranean. So we were concluding benefits of the keto don't outweigh the potential risks of avoiding legumes, fruits, and whole intact grains. So this is the first time we used continuous glucose monitors. This is a pretty fascinating new toy, shiny new toy for us. And the Predict group from Zoe has been doing this a lot. So this is this fantastic thing that started in the UK. There's 1,000 twins in this study. And Predict 1 was completed quite a while ago, looking at these twins and looking at sleep, exercise, diet, what you ate before, what you ate after. And they've got a little sub-study of carbs and another little sub-study. And then after doing a bunch of these in twins, they actually came and approached Harvard and us at Stanford, and we recruited another 1,000 people. And all of this was done remotely, not in twins. And they're now taking this remote work and trying to recruit 10,000 people. The same level of people that they're trying to get in the NIH trial, they're recruiting through this Zoe app. So I'm not actually involved in the NIH one, but I am involved in the Zoe one. And it really is all about precision nutrition. And it will be years before we have good answers, but really exciting to be working on that. So curious to know if any of you are using the Zoe app right now. It does cost a bunch of money. I think it's $350 to join, and I can't remember what the monthly rate is. But they've already got 2 fantastic Nature Medicine papers out. This had to do with What is the contribution of genetics versus sleep versus exercise versus diet for glucose? And this has to do with teasing apart what microbes look like they're the most important for healthy versus unhealthy diets. Now, I want to end after all that precision nutrition on suggesting that, yes, I think it's exciting. I think there is something to come from this, but the science isn't there yet. People who are selling you things are ahead of the science, and I'm a little worried that when it doesn't work out and some of these places go out of business, it's like, no, there's nothing to this. There's nothing to the microbiome. There's nothing to the genome. I don't think that's true. I think there really is still room for that, but we need more science. And in the meantime, could we please focus on what we haven't disagreed about for many years? So these items right here, across all the diets there are, I can't think of two more polarized than keto and low-fat vegan. I can get keto and low-fat vegan to agree on all of these. And America doesn't do this. They don't even eat enough vegetables or whole foods, and they eat way too much added sugar, refined grain, and processed food. If you're going to move a little forward to this next tier here, I got people saying lectins are a problem for beans. Come on, there's so many great things in beans, so many great nutrients, completely outweighs the lectins. Yes, fruits have sugars, but it's in a food matrix. It's not absorbed as quickly. It's not as bad in fruits as it is in added sugar. Yes, nuts have fats, but they're mostly unsaturated. Yes, eggs have cholesterol, but if you really want cholesterol 101, I can tell you why saturated fat is worse for your blood cholesterol than dietary cholesterol. And vegetarians, get over it. Fish have a face, but really, it's a pretty healthy source of food. So there's broad agreement across these, and we don't eat enough of these. And you could even take this out to whole intact grains and poultry. Let's differentiate between steel-cut oats and donuts. Let's differentiate between pasture-raised poultry and Kentucky Fried Chicken. Let's be specific and put this in context. The two most controversial I find are dairy and red meat, but even there, yogurt, pretty broad agreement for yogurt. Go-gurt, not sure Go-gurt has yogurt in it, really. And red meat, is this hot dogs and processed red meat, or is this, well-raised meat? So very frustrating for me that we're focusing so much on the shiny new toys, the continuous glucose monitor, the precision nutrition, when in fact, we have 100% agreement on this. And we're not getting a lot of movement on that in diets. So even considerable agreement for more of these groups. I wish we would do more of that. American Heart just updated their dietary guidance in 2021. You're going to be shocked how little change there was. You should eat veggies and fruits. You should eat whole grains, not refined grains. You should get most of your protein from legumes and nuts. And it goes on and on and on. That the standard guidelines of the dietary guidelines for American, diabetes guidelines, World Health Organization, really hasn't changed much for a long time. And so maybe that's why precision nutrition is the shiny new toy and it's exciting, but really we need more behavioral change around some of these. One of the really nice things that I actually like seeing in the most recent HA scientific statement was looking at environmental impact, which for me is a new motivator for people to make some of the changes that we've been having a hard time getting them to make. In fact, I got asked at the last Council of Epi and Lifestyle meeting for AHA to give a whole talk on food and sustainability. I got to give a keynote talk on this. I was really thrilled that AHA is taking this seriously. And I want to end on a more practical note here. Seems like people are a little confused. They want me to eat the Mediterranean salad instead of the steak, but I'm not going to rice and beans. That's just too boring. And these are, I think that's a false representation of what we're talking about here. I got 3 Mediterranean salads here with chicken, with feta, that's vegetarian. There's a vegan one, shakshuka. What a marvelous dish. This one has beef and eggs in it. You could leave out the beef. And so here's a vegetarian shakshuka with eggs. And this is a little silly. Here's a vegan shakshuka where they cut up some squash. And are they pretending it's eggs? I don't really think they're fooling anyone. Tacos. You can do so many things with tacos. There's fish tacos, cheese tacos, vegan tacos. World bowl. Here's a Korean fried chicken bowl. It's plant-based. There are a lot of plants in that Korean fried chicken. or here's one with some egg on it for a vegetarian, and here's a Buddha bowl. So I've been having a lot of fun working with chefs lately, making things unapologetically delicious. And so this is actually a collaboration that started between Harvard and the Culinary Institute of America, targeting the food industry. And I want to let you know that Stanford has partnered with the satellite group of the Culinary Institute of America that's in Napa. If you haven't been to Napa, or St. Helena, the Greystone Castle, fabulous places to go. We're doing research in dining halls of university around behavior and ordering and choice architecture, keeping an eye on deliciousness. I'm having a blast working with chefs so that you don't have to give up on taste. Okay, so I think I have at least 1 minute left or two. So Errol and others, I'm gonna sneak something in. I'd love to give you all a shout out about some of the things going on at Stanford that maybe I could get you interested in. One is completely selfish. We have an ongoing study of moms and their offspring, and we're trying to characterize the transmission of the maternal microbiome to the kid. We've recruited 80 pregnant women already, but we're supposed to be at 130 already. So if y'all know any pregnant moms who want to do some science, we just mostly need their poop for about 2.5 years. Thanks if you could pass any of those on to us. If you get a hold of these slides and they'll be made available, here's a QR code, but you could also just have them write nutrition@stanford.edu. That's pretty intuitive, right? Or Dr. Adewuya worked with me on this nutrition series of CME things. So this has been advertised lately a lot. We got a 13-minute cartoon. We got a 32-minute podcast to listen to, or we have a 72-minute webinar. All those made by Stanford, and I got to help with those. I actually have been teaching human nutrition to the HumBio program for 20 years now, and that got translated into an online course, an 8-week course, 8 to 10 hours, certificate program. It actually costs a lot of money, but if you ping me, it's offered about 5 times a year. I'm allowed a couple freebies every time it starts. So if anybody wants to take this, I can sneak you in for a freebie. We have a fabulous teaching kitchen going on in the Center for Academic Medicine, being led by Michelle Hauser. It's a course, Surge 244. The doctor is in the kitchen. Look at these med students. We've taught this about 4 times now. Michelle is a Harvard-trained physician and a Cordon Bleu-trained chef. So this is a fabulous opportunity, and we really would like to extend this teaching kitchen, which is only being used 1 night a week, so that we can offer this to established physicians, not just med students, and maybe patients. So lots of opportunities here maybe for a teaching kitchen. Shout out to a group that I just met 2 nights ago for dinner. So here we got some hospital food leaders. Jesse Cool is a local chef hero, got an undergrad, got a farmer, got a earth sciences doctoral fellow, and there's Michelle, and we got surgery doc and resident. We're trying to reimagine hospital food. And lastly, I want to thank my introducer, Tomiko, and Neha for an exciting thing they have going where they're trying to get the Stanford Physician Nutrition Education Program. So please write to Neha if you would like to join. I think they actually have a bunch of folks joining them already, and more to come. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm pretty sure I left 12 minutes for questions. And I can stay longer if need be, and I'll stop sharing.
Great, Christopher, that was tremendous. Thank you so much. What an amazing body of work that you have created. So I have the honor of moderating the question and answer session, and there are many. So I'm going to start with, actually, I'm going to bunch a couple of questions together. There's a couple of questions on fermented foods from your Fifo study. One person asks that, sorry, the question just moved. For many people, fermented means ethanol. Please specify exactly what you mean by that term. Kimchi seems to be obvious. What about yogurt and cheeses? And then the other related question was regarding, did you take the probable increase in fiber intake in the fermented food group into account? Since, for example, sauerkraut, kimchi, et cetera, not only have probiotics, but also prebiotics. So that's
right. So great. So I'll do the second one first, because that was easy. Actually, the way we counsel them and monitoring their fiber intake. So the The fermented food group did not increase their fiber, and the fiber group did not increase their fermented food. So internal validity was fine there. So I'm happy to go through more detail, but that's the quick answer. We have a graphic of showing with the extensive nutrition assessment that was true. Along the lines of all fermented foods, so here's an interesting thing. You can't get any live microbes from wine or beer or liquor. I know there's a fermented. You also can't get it from tempeh, which many of you may know is a fermented soybean, but because of the heat processing required, you kill off all the microbes in the tempeh. So you're gonna have to find these in the refrigerated section, and it's foods. It's gonna have to be pickled vegetables. And another note of caution, I know that there's actually some kind of fermented product at Costco now where they kill off all the microbes after the fermentation, and then they add microbes back at the end. And it seems like kind of a goofy way to do this. The whole point was that you ferment these vegetables and you create these byproducts. And the Sonnenbergs are actually studying the brine from some of the fermentation process. So they've actually taken out the vegetables and they're only looking at the brine. And it appears that some of the metabolic byproducts created during fermentation, actual fermentation, not just splashing vinegar on cabbage, which is cheating. It may be the brine. So we're not talking about alcohol, but we are really interested in the whole fermentation process and pickled veggies and some of the things we could be eating more of.
Great. Bob Harrington has a specific question. Go for it, Bob.
Great, thank you. And Christopher, as always, thank you. I know few scientists that are both more informative and entertaining at the same time than you. So thank you for being here with us today. You make the whole subject fun, which is a great message for particularly for our trainees and young faculty out there. Thank you also for all the work you do on behalf of the American Heart Association. As you know, at the AHA, we're interested in this concept of food as medicine. And you've shown us a bunch of data that I would say we pretty much know what to eat.
Yes.
But getting us to do it seems to be the tough part. And you showed that fascinating graph, which I had not seen before, about delivery versus self-obtained. What should we be studying in a food as medicine population level randomized trial? Is it the food itself or is it the delivery mechanisms? And what delivery mechanisms would you suggest?
Right. And so actually, Bob, to address that, I'll just start off and say, I think my field has done a disservice to adherence. So when you study a lot of these diets and they say A did better than B, and then the next day you say, oh, there's a new study, B did better than A. And if you look deeper, sometimes it was an adherence issue or setting this up as a straw man to do. For one, you really had to think about it. You had to log. And the other one, you got a leaflet. And they said, the American Heart diet is no good. We gave them the leaflet and they didn't do as well as all this exciting new thing and the changes, and we delivered the food. And so, yeah, in my mind, the next area to move in is getting maximal implementation of what you're doing. And that requires maximal adherence. And so this has to be culturally sensitive. It has to be affordable. It has to be accessible. So I'm really excited about this new American Heart Movement that really built on the White House conference that just happened on September 28th, White House Conference on Hunger and Food Security, a term that we are now shifting to nutrition security. So American Heart, I was the co-chair of a paper that recently came out from American Heart saying food security in our safety net programs ends up being a lot about calories and getting enough food to not be hungry, but we're actually exacerbating some health disparities among those who don't have enough to eat. And so this new idea, this partnership potentially between American Heart, Rockefeller, Kroger, the grocer, there was a little battle going on with the new purchase of Albertsons and Kroger. Let's see how that turns out. Uber, DoorDash. Could we be delivering food so that insurance companies might end up covering some of this food as medicine? Because if we could get them to eat the foods that we intended, again, those AHA guidelines haven't changed for a long time. It's the motivation to make that change, create new habits, keep those habits. So I think we need to pay a lot more attention to adherence. And how do you motivate people to do this? So a sideline that I don't want to go into too much is, at least in some of my classes in Stanford undergrads, this is not necessarily the nutrition insecure group, but actually plenty of Stanford students don't have enough to eat. We won't go into that. We talk about food and societal issues. So we talk about climate change, animal rights and welfare, human labor abuses. And as you start getting into food, there's actually a number of hooks that I would encourage clinicians to think of beyond health. So if your patient's eyes are glazing over because they don't really care how many grams of fiber or micrograms of antioxidants they're getting, do they care about local food? Do they care about farmer suicides? Do they care about community support? Is there a community garden? Is there something physicians can do? Can the physicians cook more to relieve some of the stress that they have in their life? So I think there's actually a lot of room to look at different motivators and levers and to study some of this. Yes, as you're suggesting, food delivery is now a lot easier than it was in the past. And one of our ideas here for our next study that Matt Landry, our postdoc, is really thinking about is food delivery at first, where you get the whole menu prepared and you just microwave it. And then the ingredients. So you're actually going to have to chop them and cook them and work with them, but they got provided to you. And then you're on your own. And then you wean that off and, okay, actually now I know how to shop. Now I have some basic knife skills. Now I've made this a habit. Yeah, I think there's tremendous room for work in that area. And I'm really glad the American Heart's supporting it.
Thanks, Christopher.
Deborah, looks like you've got a question live.
Yes, thank you so much for an outstanding talk. I'm a geriatrician, and so I routinely speak to patients about healthy diet as well as physical activity. And I was just curious, in the studies that you presented, was there any follow-up in terms of sustainability? Because we know that the microbiome is pretty easy to manipulate in the first 36 months of life, but there seems to be a literature to suggest that as we age, not so much. And so both those things, how long does it take to make those changes? Although I probably should have looked at your graph more carefully, and also sustainability over time.
Yeah. So actually, Deborah, we had a very frustrating finding. One of the first collaborations I did with the Sonnenberg group was they looked at our Diet Fits weight loss folks, just a subset of them where we collected poop over a year. And they saw changes at 6 months that in the microbiome that disappeared at 12. They reverted back. And according to what they said in their diet assessment, they were maintaining their weight loss. Well, I knew they were maintaining their weight loss, but they said they were maintaining their diet changes as well. So there's an incredible resilience. I mean, think about wiping out the microbiome with antibiotics. It returns almost every time. But I will say that the Sonnenbergs have done incredible mouse work over 4 generations. They continue to lose microbial diversity and they can't recover. Personally, Justin Sonnenberg, total anecdote here, has doubled his microbial diversity over the last 5 years. Now, he describes his household as having this like patina of shit all around where, you know, they don't clean everything. They're not super hygienic. They pet their dogs and lick their fingers. They do a lot of, he has a lot of great recipes. So he has changed his microbiome and maintained it. I think it might not happen with very small changes. I think if we were to make more substantive changes, it would help, but we need more long-term studies to see that. But you're right. I mean, one of the reasons we're studying the maternal microbiome is because that transfer to the infant is so important for the rest of life, but you shouldn't be doomed. So we're working on it. Thanks for asking. I don't have a great answer, but that's another question we'd like to address.
Great, thanks. So there's a lot of interest in looking at gender and ethnicity differences with respect to dietary changes. If you want to make some comments, Michelle Berry and Donald Golden have asked some good questions on that front.
So the one specific one with gender that I have is we have another fabulous postdoc, Lucia Aronica, who published in Obesity or International Journal of Obesity. Diet Fits was never designed to look specifically by gender. So there's 300 in each group, but it was about 57% women and 43% men. And she looked at it. There were some very modest gender differences. And the quick summary here is women assigned to low carb, which is high fat, seem to have a hard time wrapping their head around that. There's so many decades of be skinny, don't eat fat, don't get fat. There actually was a gender difference in adherence and a small gender advantage for men over women on the low carb diet. But it was small. It was very, very small. Culturally, absolutely. I mean, these days we spend a lot more time being culturally sensitive, looking at dietary guidelines and making sure that we can make those culturally appropriate. I don't know of a lot of metabolic differences. I can't say that there's a Black, white, Asian, Hispanic metabolic difference in responses to the same foods. Those tend to be more different within any of those populations than between them on average. Certainly worth looking at, but we need larger numbers for that. And hopefully that is one of the things some of these folks getting 10,000, maybe the NIH, all of us with 10,000 people will find, because they're very intentionally making that racially, ethnically diverse, as will the Zoe group when they get their 10,000 people. All those are going to be very short-term studies, though. Those aren't 10,000 people changing their diet, tracking them every month for 10 years. Realistically, the NIH study is only a couple months long. After all that work, the interventions will be very short, and to Deborah's point, won't really even address sustainability of microbiome changes if they see them. So maybe some big accelerator team science, as Bob Harrington has been promoting, would do this in the long run. I think you're right, Bob. We need hundreds of millions of dollars, and happy to help lead the charge on that.
Great. So a couple of very targeted questions. So Michelle Berry also asked about, are sugar substitutes better than sugar? And then there's another question about, oil, healthy oils versus, again, just general fat and oil. What is your opinion there?
Yeah, let me start with artificial sugars. So there's really, I don't know of any artificial sugars that are in broccoli or red bell peppers. I only know of them in crap. And so they had a cookie that had crap in it, and then they had cookie of crap. It didn't have sugar, it had artificial sweetener. Is it a healthy cookie? No. Is it a healthier cookie? Probably. I actually was the author of a 2012 American Heart Position Statement on artificial sweeteners. And it was actually hugely disappointing. When we got to the end, we said not enough evidence for a clear answer, because for the artificial sweeteners, a huge aspect of that is compensation. And there's two types of compensation, physiological and psychological. So the psychological one is, wow, I had a diet soda instead of a regular soda for lunch. I'm going to pat myself on the back. It's dinner time. I wasn't going to have a piece of chocolate cake, but now I will, because I saved all those calories for lunch. And then you compensate. And sometimes you overcompensate. You actually have more sugar later because of what you skipped earlier in the day. The other one's actually physiological, where your body tasted sweet and it expected calories and it didn't get calories. And so physiologically, there's a reaction that says, no, I'm even hungrier than I thought I was before, because I thought I was getting this energy level and I did not. So in the world of artificial sweeteners, compensation is the huge deal. If you can replace sugars with artificial sweeteners and not compensate later in the day, I would say yes. I would say doesn't make it a health food, but it would make it healthier. In fact, when we were writing up this position statement from AHA, we were pretty negative about it, saying that, there's really not a lot of evidence for benefit. And one of the dietitians said, I'm working with a type 2 diabetic, a person with type 2 diabetes, and they've been drinking these 64-ounce big gulps of soda, not recognizing that it had sugar in it. And I convinced them of this, and they have switched to a 64-ounce big gulp of diet soda. Please don't say that there's no evidence or there's not enough evidence to show this is important. Clinically, this is hugely important for me for moving this patient into a better space. So I'm sure there's potential benefit for it. Along the lines of the microbiome, there's a couple of papers that say artificial sweeteners are having a negative impact on the microbiome. I'm having a hard time understanding that, because if you look into sucralose, aspartame, those things, they're 200 to 600 times sweeter than sugar. You're getting microscopic amounts of these molecules. I don't understand how microscopic amounts are having a big impact on the microbiome. So I don't like to plug artificial sweeteners. Again, broccoli and red bell peppers don't have any. Cookies always do, cakes and chips. So to me, it's still the same crap, but I guess maybe it's a gateway drug to more vegetables, but I don't think so, actually.
Great. Thank you so much. So I'm going to consolidate a couple questions again, probably our last question. So Hector Bonilla asks if you have any data yet. I'm guessing this is forthcoming, but data on the impact of the Mediterranean versus keto diets on cytokines and microbiome changes. I think that'll be really exciting to see. And I'm going to also bundle that with a nice question Donald Golden asked. Hold on if I can find it. How do you feel about a keto diet and a mitochondrial bypass? Does that work to burn fat? Very specific question.
There actually is some really interesting stuff going on with keto. It was always there for epilepsy. There's actually a really nice Stanford report article of one of our clinicians that's working with a specific population that's benefiting from a keto diet. And yes, there's some mitochondrial things that are actually beyond me. So I don't have a wet lab. I rely on all my fabulous colleagues for those kinds of things. As for inflammation, to me, that is one of the hottest topics. So let me end on that note, at least for, back to this precision nutrition idea. So for me, the trifecta is change your diet, change your microbiome, and lower inflammation, improve immune function. The challenge here, and we're so lucky to have the Mark Davis Holdmaker Human Immune Monitoring Center here, is they have so many damn outcomes for me. Oh my God, like they have the Olink platform. I can get hundreds and hundreds of cytokines and all kinds of phosphoflow and other things. I really need an inflammatory number. Like we have a lipid number to shoot for and a glucose number and a blood pressure number. We don't yet have an inflammatory number to shoot for. And I'm pretty sure that's what Mark Davis and that whole Human Immune Monitoring Center is about, trying to move that into the clinical realm where you would ask for that inflammatory profile along with the lipid profile and the glucose and the blood pressure for a standard result. So we're not there yet, but I hope we are. I hope we're moving closer. And when we do, I think there's going to be a diet, microbiome, inflammation trifecta coming your way from Stanford, uniquely positioned. Thank God I'm here. Thank you very much for including me today. It was a pleasure.
Great. Well, thank you. That was just an amazing, amazing tour de force. I want to thank Christopher. I want to thank all of the people that were participating in this, the great questions. Errol, I'll let you close, but that was wonderful. Thank you.
Dr. Gardner, we had a lot of comments just saying things like brilliant, thank you, wonderful. The fact there's so many questions speak to how important the work you're doing is, of course. And as Bob mentioned earlier, you really do make it exciting on top of a really important topic. So thanks for everything you do in this space. Again, thank you, Dr. Katsumoto, Dr. Keto, Dr. Shaw for being involved with this and helping set up a lot of this important talk. And Dr. Harrington, anything else you want to close us on?
No, again, thank you. Important topic. And Christopher, it was not intentional between Thanksgiving and Christmas, but we appreciate you giving us all some dietary advice. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Have a great week.
Bye.
The preceding program is copyrighted by the Board of Trustees of the Leland Stanford Junior University. Please visit us at med.stanford.edu.